The Two-Faced Children of 1863, a medical horror hidden in Alabama archives. It began with a whisper in the dust. In 1938, deep in the basement of the Montgomery County Archives, a janitor sweeping behind an old shelf uncovered a small leather-bound book, its spine cracked, its pages swollen with age. The cover bore no title, only the faint embossing of a hospital seal long erased by time. Inside, written in trembling ink, were records from 1863, the middle of the Civil War, when Alabama's fields ran red and hospitals overflowed with the dying. But this book, it wasn't about soldiers. The first pages spoke of patients from the Willow Hollow Infirmary, a small medical outpost for war widows and orphans. Yet, by page 12, the handwriting changed. The calm, neat script of a clerk became jagged, desperate. Lines were crossed out, words blurred by tears or rain. It was here the janitor stopped reading and called the archivist. The entry that froze them both began with a single line. Tonight they were born, the twins with faces that mirror life and death. The archivist, a woman named Eleanor Marsh, was used to oddities, misplaced letters, misdated reports. But this felt different. She described later in her notes that the paper smelled of iron and rot, as though the ink had been drawn from something living. Each word carried an unease, as if the author had written not to preserve history, but to confess. As she turned the pages, a strange pattern emerged. Each entry grew shorter, shakier, until the writing devolved into fragments. They blink separately. They whisper when no one is near. One smiles when the other cries. At first, Eleanor believed it was fiction, the ramblings of a doctor driven mad by war. But the ledger's details were too precise. Names of nurses, the infirmary's floor plans, the names of women admitted during childbirth. All matched other records perfectly. All but one entry, the one marked March 4, 1863, had been erased from official archives. No birth records. No baptism. No burial. Just this single line, left untouched at the bottom of the page. 2 souls, 1 breath. Eleanor's hands trembled as she closed the ledger. The pages seemed to sigh, as if relieved to be touched again after 75 silent years. Outside, rain began to fall, slow and heavy, tapping the iron window grates like fingers. She carried the book upstairs to her desk and began to type a summary for the state record. But when she reached for her teacup, she froze. The typewriter had jammed. The ink ribbon snapped clean in half, not torn, but cut, as though by a razor. She replaced it, but the new ribbon jammed again at the exact same word. 2. That night, Eleanor locked the ledger in a glass case. She told her supervisor she had found a private medical notebook, possibly from 1863, and left it at that. But something about it wouldn't leave her mind. The next morning, she returned early. The case was open. The ledger lay on her desk, exactly where she had never placed it, open to a page she hadn't read before. It was a single paragraph, written in what looked like dried blood. If you find this, burn it. Do not seek them. They were born from silence, and to silence they must return. Eleanor's candle flickered. The room felt smaller, the air thick. She stepped back, heart racing. Outside, thunder rolled across Montgomery's skyline. She tried to laugh it off, to rationalize it as a prank by the night guard. But as she turned to lock the door, she saw the reflection in the glass case. 2 small faces. One smiling. One crying. Both watching her. And in that moment, Eleanor realized the ledger wasn't a confession. It was a warning. The rain came first, hard, unrelenting, turning the red Alabama dirt into rivers of mud. Then came the wind, howling through the pine trees like something alive. It was the night of March 4, 1863, when the war had hollowed out every house and heart across the South. But in a small, sagging farmhouse at the edge of Willow Hollow, a woman named Margaret Hale fought a battle far from the front lines, a battle for her own life, and for the 2 lives that refused to be born quietly. The midwife, Agnes Croft, arrived near midnight, soaked to the bone and trembling. She had delivered dozens of children before, but she would later swear that she had never felt such fear walking toward home. The windows were blacked out. The lanterns inside burned low and blue, casting strange shadows on the wetboards. Inside, Margaret's screams cut through the storm. Her husband, a farmer too poor to join the war effort, paced the hall, muttering prayers that dissolved into curses. The fire kept dying no matter how often he fed it, as though the air itself refused warmth. Agnes wiped her hands, unpacked her instruments, and forced herself to steady her breath. "It's just another birth," she told herself. But when she lifted the blanket, she saw something that made her heart stop. The first child's head was emerging, but its features were wrong. The face seemed incomplete, soft and unfocused, as if it hadn't finished forming. The nose sloped unevenly, the eyes half shut yet strangely aware. The second child followed minutes later, smaller, quieter, but with a face too perfect, porcelain-like, lips curved in a faint, serene smile. They weren't identical, yet they were connected in ways Agnes couldn't comprehend. Both babies drew their first breath at the exact same moment. The storm outside paused. No thunder, no rain, just an aching silence that pressed against the windows. Then, as the second child cried, the first opened its mouth and mimicked the sound perfectly, a mirrored wail, one breath behind. Agnes stumbled back, dropping the towel. "Lord have mercy," she whispered. But Margaret, pale and fading, reached out weakly toward the twins. "Don't let them be separated," she murmured. Then her head fell back. Her hand dropped. Silence. The husband collapsed beside her, clutching her body, sobbing as thunder returned to shatter the moment. Agnes stood frozen, her eyes flicking between the infants, one wriggling, bright, alive, the other still, its eyes open but unblinking. And then the still one moved. Its face twitched, not in pain, but in awareness. One corner of its mouth lifted, a broken imitation of a smile. Agnes gasped and stumbled back, so hard she struck the wall. The lantern shook, its flame stretching high and blue, before snuffing out entirely. In darkness, only the sound of rain filled the room. Agnes reached for the babies, desperate to wrap them, to comfort them, to make this nightmare ordinary again. But when her fingers brushed the smaller one's cheek, its skin was ice cold. She turned to the other child, but now it, too, had fallen silent. Two faces in the dark. One alive, one not, and yet both breathing. By morning, the storm had passed. Neighbors came running when the smoke from the Hale house chimney stopped. They found Agnes sitting in the corner, rocking back and forth, clutching the twins to her chest. She said nothing for hours. When she finally spoke, her voice was distant, like a person speaking from the bottom of a well. "They share a breath," she whispered. "When one sleeps, the other watches. When one cries, the other smiles. Don't separate them." The doctor who arrived that afternoon, Silas Thornfield, ordered the children taken to the Willow Hollow Infirmary. The mother was buried before sundown. The husband vanished 2 days later, leaving no note, no trace. As the hearse rolled away, the wind returned, gentle but cold. Agnes stood by the window, watching the twins through the infirmary's wagon window. The bright-faced one blinked. The other, the one with the incomplete features, did not. But when Agnes lifted her hand to cross herself, both tiny heads turned in unison, staring directly at her. The sky rumbled again. And somewhere in the woods behind the Hale farm, a sound echoed, soft, rhythmic, impossible to place. 2 breaths. Perfectly in sync. Dr. Silas Thornfield had seen too much of death to fear it anymore. He had spent the war stitching boys who still called for their mothers as their blood drained into the red Alabama dirt. His hands had grown steady, his heart calloused. But nothing in the years of war, fever, and famine had prepared him for the day the Hale twins were brought into his infirmary. They arrived wrapped in a blanket that smelled of rain and smoke. The midwife, Agnes Croft, refused to enter the room. She only handed the bundle to the nurse and whispered, "They shouldn't have been born." Then she turned and left, never looking back. When Silas unwrapped the cloth, he froze. The first twin, pale and serene, blinked up at him with soft, glassy eyes. Beautiful, peaceful, almost ethereal. But the second, its features bent slightly wrong. Its skin a shade too gray, mirrored every movement the first made, half a heartbeat later. When one turned its head, the other followed. When one inhaled, the other exhaled. It was as if two beings were performing a single, distorted dance. He wrote in his private journal that evening, "These are not conjoined twins in the physical sense, but perhaps spiritually so. One lives in light, the other in shadow. I feel, and this I fear to confess, as though one sustains the other." Silas named them Clara and Eden, though no baptism was ever recorded. The church refused to bless them. The pastor of Willow Hollow declared them a blasphemy of flesh, warning the townsfolk that God had mirrored sin to remind man of his folly. But Silas was a man of reason, not superstition. He dismissed the rumors as hysteria. Still, each night, as he sat beside the infant's cot, he felt something unnatural in the air, a subtle shift, like the room itself was breathing with them. He began to study their patterns. When Clara smiled, Eden's face twitched. When Clara slept, Eden's eyes opened wide, staring at the ceiling. And once, only once, Silas saw Clara's chest stop rising altogether. He reached for her in panic, but before he could act, Eden's tiny hand clenched, trembling, and Clara gasped back to life. He dropped his pen. That night, he wrote no more notes. He only sat in the dark ward, the twins asleep in their cradle, the lamplight flickering low. Outside, thunder rolled through the fields, slow and deliberate. Days passed, and the infirmary staff began to whisper. The nurse reported waking in the night to the sound of two babies crying, but only finding one in the crib. Others swore they saw faces in the window, pale and curious, though no one was outside. Silas dismissed them all. He told himself it was exhaustion, wartime nerves, imagination. Yet one evening, as he leaned over to change the infant's wrappings, Clara's tiny eyes met his, clear, intelligent, almost human in their recognition. And she smiled. For the first time, Eden's expression didn't follow. Her head turned toward the wall, instead. The doctor leaned closer, whispering softly, "You see me, don't you?" The candle flame sputtered. A draft crossed the room, though every window was sealed. Then Eden's mouth opened, not in a cry, but in a low, soft hum. It was a sound Silas had only heard once before long ago, on the battlefield, the last exhale of a dying man. He backed away slowly, heart pounding. The nurse, startled by the noise, rushed in. But when she looked into the cradle, both babies were silent, peaceful, asleep. Silas said nothing. That night, he locked the nursery door and began a separate journal, one he did not intend anyone to find. He wrote of his fear, his fascination, and his guilt. For deep down, beneath all logic, he had begun to wonder whether these children were a miracle of nature, or a message. Weeks later, he made his first mistake. He took a photograph. The exposure took nearly a minute, the twins wrapped in white, their eyes reflecting the lamplight. But when he developed the image hours later, the glass plate revealed something that made his blood run cold. Two faces, yes, but not the same ones he'd seen through the lens. One was smiling, the other was watching him. By midsummer of 1863, the war had faded into background noise for the people of Willow Hollow. The sound of distant gunfire and the rumor of burned towns were nothing compared to the whispers that now spread through the valley. Whispers about the Hale twins. They called them the Mirror Children. Some said they had seen them in the infirmary window, two small faces watching through the glass, one bright as morning, the other gray as ash. Others swore that when they passed the building at night, their lanterns flickered, and they heard something that wasn't crying but laughing, a soft, mocking echo that lingered long after the sound stopped. Dr. Silas Thornfield dismissed it all as fear and gossip. Yet even he couldn't deny that something was changing inside the infirmary. The children were growing, but not equally. Clara, the fair one, thrived. Her cheeks filled, her eyes shone. Eden remained frail, her movements jerky, her gaze fixed somewhere no one could follow. What unsettled Silas most was that Eden's pulse always matched Clara's exactly, one heartbeat behind. He began recording it every day, his journal filling with synchronized data. Clara, 92 BPM. Eden, 92 BPM delayed. Clara coughs, Eden trembles. Clara sleeps, Eden blinks. The more he documented, the more impossible it became to explain. It wasn't simply shared reflexes. It was connection. A rhythm beyond medicine. Then, one evening in June, a nurse screamed. Silas rushed to the nursery and froze in the doorway. Both cribs were empty. The window latch hung open. On the floor lay two small sets of footprints, one clear, the other faint, leading straight to the wall. But the wall was solid brick. When they pried open the boards the next morning, they found nothing, only cold air seeping through cracks that shouldn't have been there. Yet from that day on, the infirmary's halls felt different, colder, still. Even the patients stopped speaking of the children. No one wanted to say their names. And still, the sightings grew. A soldier recovering from infection claimed he woke one night to see a child standing by his bed, her face gentle, smiling, until he noticed another smaller face peering from behind her shoulder, its eyes too large, too hollow. The next morning, he refused treatment and fled the infirmary barefoot. Another nurse, God-fearing and firm, resigned after hearing faint laughter echoing through the nursery, even though both children were asleep when she checked. She left behind a note with only 3 words. They shared dreams. Silas's confidence began to unravel. Each night, he reread his notes, searching for reason. I must not succumb to superstition, he wrote. There is science beneath the terror. But the photograph haunted him. He had locked it in his drawer, yet every time he opened it, the image seemed to change slightly, the faintest shift in the faces, the eyes a little more aware. Once, late at night, he found a smudge of moisture on the glass, as though something had breathed against it from the inside. He started sleeping in his office, near the nursery door. That's when he began to hear them. Soft murmurs. 2 voices, low and rhythmic, overlapping each other. He couldn't make out words, only the tone, like a lullaby sung backward. It would stop the moment he opened the door. Every time. Until one night, he caught it clearly. A word, whispered by both voices in unison. His name. Silas. He froze, candle trembling in his hand. He looked down into the cribs. The twins lay perfectly still. Clara's eyes were open, bright and calm. Eden's were closed. He turned away, heart pounding, when a soft giggle echoed behind him. He spun back and gasped. For a split second, he saw 2 Claras. Both faces flawless, identical, smiling. Then one blinked, and the other's face twisted, collapsing back into the half-formed grimace he knew too well. The candle fell from his hand, wax spilling like tears across the floor. He backed out of the room, breath shallow. That night, his journal contained only one line, written over and over. The faces should not exist. By late summer, Willow Hollow no longer spoke in whispers. It roared. The town was divided, half convinced that Dr. Thornfield had uncovered a miracle of medicine, half certain he had invited something unholy into God's land. When the rumors reached the pulpit of St. Matthew's Church, the fire that had smoldered for months finally caught flame. On the morning of August 2nd, 1863, Pastor Abel Marin thundered from the altar with veins bulging in his neck. His voice carried through the church rafters like thunder itself. The devil does not always come as a serpent, he cried. Sometimes he wears the faces of innocence. The Lord made man in his image, but he did not make 2 faces for one soul. The congregation gasped. Women clutched their rosaries. Men crossed themselves. Then Marin spoke the names, the children of the Hale woman. From that moment, it was no longer superstition. It was scripture. Silas Thornfield knew what it meant. He'd seen the way people looked at him when he walked through town, the averted eyes, the whispers that followed. He'd heard the word which murmured behind closed shutters. He knew fear when he saw it, and now it was staring him down in every direction. That evening, he visited Pastor Marin himself, carrying the medical records, sketches, and the one photograph he dared not show to anyone else. Pastor, he began, voice trembling. These children are sick, yes, but not cursed. Their condition is unlike anything recorded. If we study them, we could learn. Marin slammed his hand on the table. Study. His eyes blazed. You would study what God has condemned? You would keep such abominations breathing beneath the sky. Silas tried to hold his ground, but Marin leaned closer, his breath heavy with wine and zeal. If you will not end this heresy, then the Lord will send his hand through us to do it. The next Sunday, the church bell tolled 13 times, a number unheard of in Willow Hollow. It was meant to summon prayers for the war dead. Instead, it summoned something darker. The town gathered in the square that evening, carrying torches and scripture, their faces set like stone. They marched toward the infirmary as thunder cracked over the horizon. Inside, Silas heard them before he saw the light of their torches. He locked the doors, moved the twins into the cellar, and barred the windows. The children stirred, as if they felt the tremors of approaching anger. Clara whimpered softly. Eden did not move. Outside, the chanting began. Cleanse the sin. Burn the mirror. Over and over. The sound was a heartbeat of hate. Silas fell to his knees beside the cradle, torn between science and faith, reason and fear. He looked down at the two tiny faces, one calm, one slack and hollow. You are not demons, he whispered. You are not God's mistake. But when he reached out, Clara's hand twitched, and Eden's mouth opened. A sound escaped, low and strange, not quite a cry, not quite a word. It felt like something ancient, something older than the storm outside. Then the door shuddered under fists. The lock strained. Silas snatched the twins, clutching them to his chest. The flames outside grew brighter, painting the walls orange. Smoke seeped through the cracks as someone threw a torch through a shattered window. He ran toward the cellar, tripping over fallen instruments, choking on smoke. Behind him, glass shattered, the sound of the photo frame breaking. In that split second, before he descended into the dark, he turned back. Through the haze, he saw the photograph lying face up on the floor. And in the flicker of firelight, both faces in the picture were smiling. He stumbled into the cellar, slammed the hatch, and dropped to his knees. The chanting outside turned to screams as the flames spread to the roof. He held the twins close, rocking them, murmuring words he no longer believed in. Above him, the infirmary groaned and cracked, timbers splitting like ribs. Smoke poured through the seams, and as he coughed, choking on heat, he heard it again, that unearthly hum. Both babies were awake now, both watching him. And when he whispered, "Forgive me," they smiled in perfect unison. The ceiling above collapsed with a roar. Outside, the fire consumed the infirmary. The townsfolk fled when the steeple of St. Matthew's was struck by lightning moments later. By dawn, nothing remained but ash and silence. But in that silence, the doctor's journal survived, half-burned, pages curled, but legible enough to read one final line. If faith cannot see the truth in innocence, then perhaps innocence will find its own way to survive. The fire should have ended everything. By morning, the Willow Hollow Infirmary was gone, reduced to smoking beams and twisted iron. The air smelled of wet ash and burnt linen. The townsfolk who had gathered to cleanse sin now stood in silence, their faces pale and hollow, unwilling to look at one another. Pastor Marin led the prayer for forgiveness. But forgiveness never came, because when the ashes cooled and the investigators dug through the ruins, they made a discovery that froze the town's blood colder than the night before. They found the doctor's body, yes, Silas Thornfield, his charred hand still clutching a half-melted crucifix. They found bits of medical equipment, shattered glass, and the warped frame of a cot. But they did not find the twins. No small bones, no cloth, no trace. Only the impression of two shapes in the soot, as if something small had been lying there, and then simply rose up and vanished. For days, the search continued. The creek was drained, the woods combed, and nearby farms questioned. But no one found anything. Even the midwife, Agnes Croft, who had sworn never to speak of that birth again, broke down in confession, whispering that she had seen two children walking by the riverbank the night of the fire. They were hand in hand, she said, trembling. One smiling, one crying. The sheriff dismissed it as hysteria. No one could survive that fire, he insisted. What she saw were shadows. But shadows don't leave footprints. And yet, a week later, a hunter found 2 tiny prints by the edge of the swamp, one clear, one shallow, both pointing away from town. After that, the disappearances began. First, it was a piglet from a nearby farm. Then a cat. Then a child, a 3-year-old boy who vanished from his bed in the middle of the night. His mother swearing she heard someone laughing softly just before the window flew open. The townspeople whispered that the spirits of the mirror children had come back, not to haunt, but to replace. Old women crossed themselves when they passed the ruins. Children were forbidden from going near the ash field. Yet sometimes at dusk they said you could still see the smoke rise again, curling in 2 streams, side by side, like twin souls refusing to part. Pastor Marin's sermons grew frantic. His voice cracked as he called for a second cleansing. But even he stopped visiting the site after one midnight encounter. His maid later testified that he stumbled home pale and shaking, clutching his Bible like a shield. He said he'd seen 2 children standing among the ruins, their faces faintly lit by the embers that no longer burned. 2 faces, he whispered to her. One wore mine. Within a month, he was gone too, disappeared during a thunderstorm. The church bells tolled by themselves that night, even though the ropes had been cut weeks earlier. By autumn, the town sealed the infirmary grounds. They fenced it off, called it cursed, and tried to bury the memory. Willow Hollow emptied soon after. War took the men, fear took the rest. By 1865, the valley was little more than an echo of what it once was. But the ledger, Silas Thornfield's journal, survived. Recovered years later from beneath the ruins, half-burned but legible, it told the truth no one dared speak aloud. His final entries were fragmented, written in hurried strokes. They woke when I prayed. They walk when the rain falls. They are not dead, they are unfinished. The last page was blackened, but one sentence had been written over and over in blood-red ink, pressing so deep it tore through the paper. They will find a new face. After that, the records end. The property was abandoned, swallowed by vines and silence. But every few decades, someone would wander too close, a drifter, a hunter, a child, and claim they heard laughter under the floorboards, soft and distant, like something trying to remember how to breathe. 2 voices. Always 2. One bright, one broken, and both whispering the same word, doctor. 70 years later, the ground gave up its secret. It was October of 1933, and the land where the Willow Hollow Infirmary once stood was nothing more than a forgotten patch of overgrown earth, strangled by weeds, guarded by silence. The town that had burned with faith and fear was long gone, swallowed by time. Only the occasional historian or wanderer came through anymore, chasing ghost stories whispered from generation to generation. That autumn, a team of surveyors from Montgomery arrived to mark the area for a new road. They cleared brush, drove stakes into the soft ground, and found the first piece of the past before lunch. It wasn't metal or glass or brick. It was a small white bone. The men assumed it was an animal, until they found 2 skulls, buried shallowly behind the charred remains of what used to be the infirmary's west wing. The bones were fragile, fused with ash and clay. But it wasn't the number that disturbed them. It was the shape. Each skull was small, childlike, but with irregular seams, as though the bone had grown in 2 directions at once. And when the medical examiner from Montgomery arrived, he found something that made his hands tremble so violently he had to sit down. "These are not 2 bodies," he murmured. "They're one and not one." The vertebrae were doubled, the ribs asymmetrical, and most disturbing of all, the skulls had fused at the jawline, face to face, like a grotesque mirror frozen in bone. News spread quickly. The newspapers called it the grave that should be empty. Journalists flocked to the site. Some declared it a medical anomaly. Others whispered about the old legend, the 2-faced children of 1863. Among the curious was a woman named Eleanor Marsh, a quiet archivist from the Montgomery County Records Office. She had read about Willow Hollow before, a brief mention in a burned ledger she had catalogued years earlier. When she heard about the grave, she came immediately. The moment she saw the site, she said later, it felt as though the air itself was remembering. The excavation revealed more, tiny bones scattered in a pattern that didn't belong to burial or decay, as if someone had placed them intentionally in a ring. Inside that ring, the dirt was darker, not from fire, but from something oily, metallic. The soil itself smelled faintly of iron. That night, as rain began to fall, Eleanor sat by the trench and opened her umbrella. The workers had gone home, but she stayed, drawn by something she couldn't explain. The storm grew heavier, wind slapping the trees, and lightning flashed across the clearing. That's when she saw it. For just a second, a shape in the mud. Two small faces pressed together, reflected in the puddle beside the grave. One was smiling, the other was screaming. When she blinked, the reflection was gone. Eleanor gathered her papers and hurried toward her car, her heart pounding. But as she started the engine, the headlights flicked once, twice, and then went dark. The radio, dead for years, crackled to life for only a moment. 2 faint breaths. Then a whisper, "Don't dig." The next morning, the trench had caved in. The bones were buried again, swallowed by mud and water. The site was declared unsafe, and the project was halted indefinitely. The newspapers lost interest after a week. But Eleanor couldn't stop thinking about what she'd seen. She wrote to the Montgomery Historical Society, requesting permission to examine the ledger from Willow Hollow, the same one she had handled 5 years earlier. But when the crate arrived from storage, the book was missing. In its place was a sealed envelope addressed to her in an unfamiliar hand. Inside was a single photograph. 2 infants wrapped in cloth, their faces blurred, or perhaps doubled. On the back, written faintly in brown ink, "Some graves should never open." Eleanor locked the envelope away, but she never returned to work. Within months, she resigned, moved north, and spoke no more about the matter. And yet, each year on the anniversary of the excavation, the locals say the ground trembles slightly, as though something beneath it still breathes. 2 pulses, 2 shadows, waiting for the next curious hand to come too close. In the summer of 1941, the small white church at Willow Hollow was being renovated. The war in Europe raged on, but in that sleepy Alabama town, time moved differently, slow, cautious, haunted. The workers had no idea they were hammering against history itself when they began to replace the rotted boards behind the altar. The pastor at the time, Reverend Coleman, wanted to restore the church to its former purity. Instead, he uncovered its darkest secret. It started with the sound of paper cracking inside the wall, a brittle rustle, like dry leaves underfoot. When the first plank came loose, a bundle of yellowed pages tumbled out, tied with a faded blue ribbon and sealed with an iron pin. Someone long ago had gone to great lengths to hide it. The ribbon snapped with a whisper. The pages smelled faintly of smoke and medicine. At the top of the first sheet, written in trembling ink, the account of Dr. Silas Thornfield, for whomever dares to remember. The letter, 12 pages long, was not written for fame or science or confession. It was written by a man terrified of both memory and mercy. He began by recounting the night of the storm in 1863, the night the twins were born. He described the farmhouse, the midwife, the lightning that cracked the sky open like a wound. Then came the sentence that silenced the workers reading aloud. They were not conjoined. They were divided by something that should not have been alive in either of them. Thornfield explained that he had been experimenting with cranial mirroring, a study of how trauma and reflection could alter human development. His obsession began during the war, after witnessing soldiers with severe head wounds develop strange, mirrored tics, one eye blinking when the other should, one hand trembling when the other was still. He called it the split within. But he wanted to go further, to prove that a human could, under certain conditions, develop 2 conscious faces. The letter revealed what no record ever had. The mother of the twins had been part of his study. Unwillingly, she had been brought to the infirmary during the war, heavily pregnant, suffering from seizures. Thornfield claimed the condition could be altered with certain nervous stimulants. Tinctures, he mixed himself. He believed the twins' mutation was not a curse, but his creation. They looked upon each other, he wrote, and both faces smiled. But only one of them was breathing. The letter grew more erratic with every page. Thornfield spoke of hearing laughter from the infirmary cellar, though no one was there. Of shadows that moved against candlelight. He confessed to hiding the infants after the church declared them blasphemous. I could not destroy them, he wrote, for they loved each other, though neither could see. But then came the final page, scorched, nearly unreadable. I tried to burn the evidence. The house, the ledgers, even my hands. But something remained. Their faces changed in the flames. I buried what was left behind the infirmary. If anyone finds this, forgive me. I made a second copy, hidden where light cannot reach. No one knew what that meant. When Reverend Coleman read the last line aloud, he felt a sudden chill creep through the church. Every candle flickered, though the windows were shut tight. The workers swore they heard faint crying, not from any living child, but from inside the wall itself. The Reverend quickly gathered the pages, sealed them in a metal box, and sent them to the Alabama Historical Archive in Montgomery for safekeeping. But when the box arrived, it was empty. Only the ribbon remained. Days later, Reverend Coleman fell ill. He stopped preaching. People said he spent his final weeks staring at the church wall, mumbling the same phrase over and over. 2 faces, 1 soul. And in the years that followed, parishioners swore that every time rain hit the roof, they could hear whispers behind the altar, a man's voice pleading for forgiveness and a child's softly laughing. No one ever found the second copy Dr. Thornfield wrote about. But that wouldn't stay true for long. Because 7 years later, deep inside the state archives, a janitor would open an old filing cabinet and find a photograph no one could explain. It was a humid evening in July 1948 when the janitor, Harold Price, stayed late to finish polishing the marble floors of the Alabama State Archives. He was a quiet man, widowed, gray-haired, and methodical. He loved the silence of the archives after dark, when the echo of his broom was the only sound left in a building full of forgotten voices. That night, the hum of the overhead lights seemed unusually low, like the building itself was holding its breath. At around 10 o'clock, Harold decided to open a filing cabinet that had jammed earlier. It was marked medical records, 1860 to 1865. Dust poured out when he forced it open, followed by a flutter of loose papers, hospital notes, ink-stained reports, and one thick envelope, sealed with black wax. There was no label, no accession number, just a faint pencil scrawl, for eyes that do not fear reflection. Inside was a single photograph. At first glance, it looked like a normal sepia image of 2 infants lying side by side on a cloth-covered table. But something about it felt wrong. The light source didn't match the shadows. The children's expressions seemed uneven. One looked peaceful, eyes half closed, lips curved as if smiling. The other, barely inches away, appeared strained, mouth open as if caught in mid-scream. But the strangest thing, their faces seemed connected by something faint, like a shimmer between their profiles. Harold leaned closer. Under the flickering light, the faint connection between the faces seemed to move. The smiling infant's eyes shifted toward him. Then, almost imperceptibly, the screaming face's mouth began to close. He dropped the photo. It slid across the tile floor, stopping beneath the lamp. The expressions were still again. But when Harold picked it up, he noticed something else, written faintly along the photo's border, in the same trembling ink seen on Thornfield's letter. Property of W.H. Infirmary, burned 1863. And below it, scrawled in what looked like dried blood, "Don't look twice." Harold thought it was a trick of exhaustion, or maybe the old bulbs playing with his vision. He set the photo on the archivist's desk, locked up, and went home. But as he later told his niece, he couldn't sleep. Each time he closed his eyes, he saw that shimmer, the invisible thread between 2 faces that should have been still. The next morning, the chief archivist, Margaret Hollis, found the photo lying on her desk. She assumed Harold had misplaced it and decided to catalog it properly. But when she held it up to the window light, she gasped. The two faces were now touching, forehead to forehead. The smile was gone. Both expressions were blank, perfectly symmetrical, perfectly wrong. Hollis felt a wave of nausea. She dropped the photograph into a drawer and locked it. Within the hour, she requested Harold's file and reassigned him to a different building. But when she went to inform him, she learned he had never returned to work that morning. His landlady said his room was empty, the bed still made, his jacket still hanging by the door. Only one thing was missing: the photograph. A week later, a package arrived at the archives addressed to the one who keeps the light. Inside was a burnt fragment of paper that looked like part of the photograph's backing. It smelled faintly of smoke and antiseptic. On the charred edge, someone had written, "It still watches." Margaret resigned 2 months later. Before she left, she wrote a short note in the archive logbook. "Do not file anything under WH Infirmary again. Some things do not wish to be remembered." The cabinet containing Thornfield's records was sealed with red wax and locked indefinitely. But strange reports began to circulate. Visitors claimed they saw reflections moving in the archive's display glass. One night, guards swore he saw the faint image of 2 infants pressed against the inside of a frame, one smiling, one mouthing silent words he couldn't hear. No one ever found Harold Price. His disappearance was written off as a runaway case until 1950, when a photograph was discovered in an abandoned asylum storage wing, labeled simply, "Two-Faced." In the faint reflection of the glass, you could see a third face, that of an old man, eyes wide in horror, forever frozen beside them. By the winter of 1953, the Willow Hollow files had become a legend, whispered among archivists, feared by historians, and officially erased by the state. No one dared to request them anymore. The cabinet that once held Dr. Silas Thornfield's records was chained shut, the key sealed inside a concrete block marked, "Do not open. Administrative order." Even the janitors avoided that corner of the Alabama State Archives after dark. But silence never lasts long when truth is buried. In February of that year, a new archivist named Thomas Heller arrived from Georgia. Young, ambitious, and skeptical of ghost stories, he made it his mission to restore order to the Forbidden Wing. He believed superstition was the enemy of history, that truth could always be uncovered if one simply looked hard enough. The staff tried to warn him, "Leave the red-sealed cabinet alone," Margaret Hollis had once said before her resignation. Some things filed themselves back. But Thomas laughed it off. One night, long after the others had gone, he returned to the darkened hall with a crowbar. The air was heavy, the lights dim and sickly yellow. He pried open the cabinet's chain and forced the drawer open. Inside was nothing, just an envelope. Thick gray, unmarked, except for a faint watermark on its flap. WH Infirmary, Willow Hollow, 1863. He opened it. Inside was the photograph. The same one that had driven others to resign, vanish, or worse. It was cracked now, the edges blistered with burn marks, but the image was unmistakable. 2 infants, faces impossibly close. Only now, one of them had eyes open, staring directly at the camera. Thomas set it under a lamp and adjusted his glasses. The light caught the photo's surface, and he realized something terrifying. There were reflections behind the children. Rows of blurred figures in white coats. A shadow that looked like a man holding a scalpel. And, at the very edge, half obscured by light, a woman's face weeping. Thomas leaned closer. The reflection in the glass shifted. The infants' heads moved, only slightly, as if turning toward him. And then the lights flickered out. He dropped the photo and stumbled back, cursing under his breath. When he managed to flick his lighter on, the drawer of the cabinet had closed itself. The chain lay coiled on the floor, like something had unwrapped it from within. But the worst part wasn't the dark. It was the whispering. Dozens of voices, faint but distinct, rising and falling like breathing, from inside the drawer. Words too fast to catch, except for one phrase that kept repeating, in perfect unison. "He made us." He made us. He made us. Thomas slammed the drawer shut and ran for the exit. When security arrived minutes later, the room was empty. His lighter lay on the floor. His coat still hung by the door. But Thomas Heller was gone. 3 days later, the director of the archives received an anonymous envelope. Inside was a short note, written in typewriter ink. Lock the files. Seal the room. The two-faced are still watching. From that day on, Archive Room B-12 was permanently closed. The door was bricked over, the records destroyed, and any mention of Willow Hollow was scrubbed from the public record. The only surviving entry in the state's register was a single typed line, added months later. Some faces should not be remembered. And yet, visitors to the Alabama archives, even now, sometimes report strange reflections in the old marble floors. A flicker of movement when the hall is empty. Two shapes side by side. One smiling, one silent. And if you stand there long enough, the temperature drops. You'll hear the faintest sound, not footsteps, not whispers, but something soft, rhythmic. Two breaths. In perfect harmony. Still waiting to be seen.